Isikoff of Newsweek. Mr. Isikoff, thanks for being here this morning.
Good morning.
This is your report from this week's Newsweek. It looks like you were the first journalist to have a look at this report or to write on it.
Yeah, it's a big report, so I think there's going to be a lot to write about when we finally get the document in just a couple hours. But I focus there on I think what is going to get some of the most attention, which is the failings of the FBI, especially in the San Diego area. In fact, the saga of the intelligence lapses prior to 9/11 involves a lot of different players, a lot of different agencies' failures, but it revolves mostly around two of the hijackers, Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, who flew into the United States from a al-Qaeda terrorist summit in Malaysia in January 2000. They settle into the San Diego area and have numerous contacts with people who were known to the FBI. They live in the house of an FBI informant. It turns out, as the report will make clear, there was an abundance of information about these two individuals within the U.S. intelligence community. In fact, the CIA knew about them coming to the United States, never passed that along to the FBI. The FBI had a lot of leads about some of the individuals who they were coming into contact with, and the report is going to criticize both the CIA for not passing along the information that it had, and the FBI for not aggressively investigating many of the terrorism leads in the San Diego area that might have led them to these two hijackers.
We're going to continue taking your calls on the 9/11 intelligence report. The numbers are on the screen. If you tend to agree with President Bush, 202-585-3880. If you tend to disagree with President Bush, 202-585-3881. Yesterday, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee was on this program, Senator Pat Roberts. Here's what he had to say.
Let me ask you about this report that is expected to come out tomorrow. It's previewed in this week's Newsweek magazine. Quote, the FBI blew repeated chances to uncover the 9/11 plot because it failed to aggressively investigate evidence that al-Qaeda's presence in the U.S., especially in the San Diego area, where two of the hijackers were living, according to this congressional report set for release this week. And again, it's coming out tomorrow, a 900-page document.
That's essentially correct. There were many egregious errors in hindsight. 2020, I was a member of that investigation. Bottom line is, I don't think there's anything that the FBI, CIA could have done under the circumstances to prevent the attack.
Was there anything have you heard
well,
differently?
I mean, there is no smoking gun. There is no specific piece of information that they had in their possession that told them there was going to be an attack on September 11th against the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. But there were a lot of missed opportunities that could have led them to these two hijackers. Those two hijackers had then, proceeded to interact with something like 8 or 9 others. So had the FBI been surveilling them, had they been monitoring them, had they had national security warrants to tap their phones and track what they were doing, there's a reasonable chance that they might have come across the plot if all the pieces had been put together. Now again, that's hindsight, and it's always easier to say in hindsight. But the report is important for a number of reasons. It does highlight a lot of the problems in communication sharing, in the use of intelligence that was clearly present in the days before September 11th and led to what in its totality was obviously the most massive intelligence failure since Pearl Harbor.
We'll continue talking with Michael Isikoff for the next half hour and take your calls. Clinton, Iowa, you're first up. Good morning.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to
well, Congressman LaHood is gone. Would
yeah,
you like to talk with Michael Isikoff?
I'll just go ahead and make my statements anyway.
Go ahead, sir.
First of all, this report coming out won't be believed unless there's an independent commission set up, and not one of the political ones like in the last administration. And second of all, Mr. LaHood made a statement that it was like the Clinton administration that pulled the funding for the FBI and the CIA.
Does this go back and investigate the Clinton administration?
Well, not investigate the Clinton administration per se, but it certainly goes back many years and covers a period of time when the Clinton administration was in charge. So that's certainly the case. On the caller's point, there is an independent commission that is following up on the evidence in this report, and it is working and will have a more complete report covering a broader range of areas. This focuses on the intelligence failures. The independent commission's report will include that and include include a lot of other material in a report that's due to be released next spring, I think in May.
Next call from Michael Isikoff, Liberty, Texas. Good morning.
Hello, Mr. Isikoff. I'd just like to praise your work. We seem to be getting a lot of beards on the program, and you're a rarity in that you actually have some articulate ideas to express. I would just like to say that this game, as far as pointing the finger at the Clinton administration, is preposterous, where the true issue, it seems to be that because the Republicans offer more funding to management of the intelligence services, that they seem to come down on that side, and that the greatest travesty of all were the thousands of intelligence hours. We're hearing a lot about squandered resources. That the resources were there, the information was there, but the FBI and these intelligence services were distracted doing such squirrelous things as investigating Monica Lewinsky. The greatest travesty of all is the fact that these people are supposed to be professionals. They have a job beyond politics, and that they are supposed to be protecting people 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year.
Mr. Isikoff.
Well, there are a lot of things you can say about that. Obviously, first of all, decisions about what the FBI should focus its resources on are decisions made by ultimately prosecutors in the Justice Department or independent counsels in some cases. But I mean, I think the broader issue is the attention that was devoted to the terrorist threat, given, you know, Al-Qaeda's clear presence in Afghanistan, the fatwas from bin Laden saying we are out to kill Americans, the plotting that was going on that was known to the intelligence community. Were the proper resources devoted to that threat over many years? And I think the report is going to suggest that insufficient. While there are a lot of people were talking about it, a lot of people recognized the threat, the message didn't go down to the troops in the field.
There's a common thread in all the articles on this report, starting with yours,
Yeah.
Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Philadelphia Inquirer today,
Sure.
talking about the fact that there's 28
Right.
pages missing or being deleted
Right.
from the public report because it deals with Saudi Arabia.
Right. That is going to be probably the biggest political fallout from this. The deleted 28-page section, which is, I think, ambiguously referred to or vaguely referred to as the role of foreign governments. That's primarily the Saudis. But as we reported in the piece this week, there are sort of tantalizing pieces of evidence that's going to be included in other sections of the report. One involves, some of that involves a man by the name of Omar al-Bayoumi, who was a key associate of these two hijackers in San Diego, who the report suggests may have been a Saudi government agent. The man, in fact, had, before he meets the hijackers when they fly into the country in Los Angeles, he goes to a closed-door meeting at the Saudi consulate in Los Angeles and then goes directly to a restaurant where the hijackers appear. He meets them, he takes them to San Diego, he puts them up in an apartment, he fronts them money to help pay their rent and facilitates their settling into the United States. And the report is going to raise a lot of questions about who Bayoumi was and who he was working for, and ultimately whether that it's going to raise questions about his connections to Saudi Arabia. The FBI, I should point out, says that they did fully investigate Bayoumi and did not find that he provided material support to the hijackers. I think there's going to be some questioning of that today.
And you report that Mr. Bayoumi is back in Saudi Arabia.
He is back in Saudi Arabia, living openly, as I understand. It is unclear whether there was any continued investigative interest by the FBI in him. Prince Bandar, the Saudi ambassador to the United States, did put out a statement yesterday vehemently denying that he was a Saudi government agent. But again, just take that one incident I described in the piece, this meeting at the Saudi consulate. I think one thing I'm going to be looking for in the report is to see whether whether the FBI pursued that. Did they question people in the Saudi consulate about why Bayoumi was there and what his business with the Saudi consulate was? I don't know if it's going to be in the public report or not. We'll see in a few hours.
And I should note that we called the Saudi embassy repeatedly yesterday and got no response to our request for a short interview. Powhatan, Virginia, you're on the air. Good morning. Virginia, you're on the air.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for taking my call. This is just really of concern to me, and I am just incensed as an American that this 28 pages is being redacted. In fact, I think anybody could do a Google search and find that there's 30 years of continuing and growing increasingly awful terrorist attacks. And since the 9/11 bombing, there's been the bombing in Bali, there's been the ships in Yemen. I mean, this really bothers me, and I want to know, was our stock market manipulated?
Michael Isikoff.
The stock market manipulation question was something that came up early on. It was not an area that was pursued by the congressional committees. I know it is. The people at the SEC have taken a look at that, and it's on the radar screen of the independent commission. As far as I know, no credible evidence has developed that suggests there was any connection between sales of stocks prior to September 11th and the attacks themselves.
Boca Raton, Florida. Good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen. 2020 is hindsight, and just like the corporation, it started when Clinton was in office. All this stuff was starting when Clinton was in the office, and a lot more even before when Reagan was in and everything. Ever since the grandfather of terrorism, Arafat, started doing the hijackings, it has escalated into this. I believe that the Islamic people hold grudges for a long, long time, and they're trying to get back into the 700 AD when they had most of the world controlled. And they're very patient people. Their population is growing. They're spreading into every nation, every country in the world. France is 30%. A lot of the countries are afraid to do anything because of that amount of people in their country. And the blame game, I don't think it should be a blame game.
Mr. Isikoff.
I don't really have much to say. I think it was a rather overly broad brush the caller was painting there.
Glenn Simpson and David Rogers write this morning in the Wall Street Journal. I want to get your reaction to this, if this is what you found also. The White House has refused repeated requests from the intelligence panel to turn over the president's briefing materials for August 6th, 2001, citing national security. A footnote in the report merely summarizes an account of the briefing that National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice gave at a news conference last year.
Yeah, those presidential daily briefs, the intelligence briefs the president gets, those are a very contentious issue. The White House takes a very hard line that the president's daily intelligence briefs are sacrosanct. They cannot be covered by executive privilege. They could not be shared with Congress or shouldn't be shared with Congress. This actually is an institutional position that I think all White Houses would probably take, certainly have taken in the past. Yet it is key to understanding of how the warnings of the Al-Qaeda threat were being handled within the government at that time, as is now well known. There were a lot of alarm bells going off in the summer of 2001. In fact, there's an earlier intelligence brief in July that was quoted during one of the public hearings that's quite explicitly warns that there's going to be a spectacular attack by Al-Qaeda in the coming weeks. The attack will come without warning. Mass casualties could result. It's pretty alarming language, yet there's a lot of uncertainty about when this was presented. The administration refused to declassify exactly who got that briefing and what. And then, the obvious follow-up is, what did you do after it? This briefing referred to in the Glenn Simpson piece is August 6th briefing for Condoleezza Rice. I believe it took place at the presidential ranch in Crawford. Again, It was a discussion of the al-Qaeda threat at that moment, and there was apparently discussion about the use of airplanes as weapons. Exactly what was said, we're not going to find out because of the White House position. The more important issue, it seems to me, is what flowed from that and what did people do when getting this intelligence. And I think this is where there is at least some potential vulnerability to the Bush White House.
Next call from Michael Isikoff comes from Sullivan County, New York. Good morning.
Good morning, and as always, thank you for C-SPAN. Number one, I'd like to disagree with a prior caller who said that no blame should be put on the Clinton administration. The Clinton administration, on its watch, we had the bombings in Africa by al-Qaeda, and there should have been more coordination between the FBI and the CIA during the Clinton administration, and there was not. And so the Clinton administration deserves a great deal of the blame for what happened. He just was not, as Dick Morris has pointed out numerous times, he just was not interested in foreign threats to the United States. That's number one. Number two, another caller prior said that well, he implied we need a new immigration policy regarding immigration to this country from the Arab world. There are just too many in this country, and they are a threat to the United States.
Mr. Isikoff.
Plenty of blame to go around.
Are there any solutions offered in this report? First of all, how much of the 900 pages have you had access to?
I've had portions read to me, and I've had portions described to me, but 900 pages is a lot of pages, so there's a lot I'm going to be looking for.
Did anyone read, or did you have described to you any solutions or proposed?
Well, there were. There was a public summary that was put out last, I think it was December, from the committees that gave their findings and recommendations, and that was most of them were public back in December, and it covered some of the obvious areas about greater information sharing, and it raised the question of restructuring the FBI, and of course a lot of those Director Mueller has tried to initiate a lot of these himself, putting much more focus on counterterrorism and elevating counterterrorism within the FBI to, certainly its number one priority by far.
Next call, Cambridge, Illinois. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Isikoff.
Morning.
My concern rests with the Office of Special Plans, run by this administration by a man by the name of Abram Shulsky, and something like a sister unit or a unit run out of Israel by Ariel Sharon that's separate and distinct from their own intelligence unit, which forward intelligence reports to the Office of Special Plans. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I certainly know about the Office of Special Plans. A lot of attention has been given to that, particularly in the context of the war in Iraq. They were focusing a lot. This is a Pentagon intelligence unit that was set up and did spend a lot of time developing intelligence that related to Iraq. It's been controversial. Some of its conclusions differ from those of the U.S. other U.S. intelligence agencies. I'm not sure it's totally relevant to the 9/11 report because I don't believe that it existed until after September 11th.
Michael Isikoff has been with Newsweek since 1994 as an investigative correspondent, covered President Clinton's impeachment. Also is the author of a book, Uncovering Clinton, A Reporter's Story. Because of your position as an investigative correspondent, are you sniffing or smelling any scandal with this intelligence report?
Well, scandal is a term that can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. I mean, not corruption, but I think some people will find, people who get quite passionate about these subjects will find some of the missed opportunities and failings that will be identified in the report as scandalous, but perhaps not in the sense of in which others might look at it. Yeah.
Berkeley, California, good morning.
Hello.
Good morning.
Hi, how you doing? I just had a quick question, and it's not on one side or the other. I just was wondering if you see any potential for our government in this country advancing or progressing in the absence of partisan subterfuge? It just kind of seems to me, as Johnny Citizen, that this phenomenon is central to what's kind of like hindering progress and sort of keeping our rev of democracy that we currently are existing with in this state of sort of chasing its tail around.
I'm not sure what he meant, but I mean, if
Is
if
this
it
a
is that
partisan issue?
Well, I think you're going to see some partisanship, as you inevitably do in Washington. With the report today, Senator Bob Graham is running for President of the United States. He's going to be one of the participants in the press conference this afternoon because he was one of those who oversaw the inquiry. He's very big on the which is sort of shorthand for the Saudi role. He's been hitting that quite hard for some time and is seeking to make it a political issue. Porter Goss, who's the House Republican chairman of the Intelligence Committee, has worked with Senator Graham on a lot of these issues, but obviously is not going to point fingers at the Bush White House in the way that I think you'll see Senator Graham do today.
Two related emails. This is from Joel Waite of D.C. What federal laws or restrictions hindered or forbid the intelligence sharing within the various agencies? And from Newton, Massachusetts, agents did not have legal access to arrested terrorist computers. Will they now be allowed easier access?
A couple of actually, that first question is a very pertinent one, and it also relates to, I think, the second one. There was, if you had to identify the biggest barrier to information sharing that could have, the kind of information sharing that might have led U.S. intelligence and law enforcement to the 9/11 plot, it's this concept that was known as the wall, which is that information gleaned by the intelligence community could not be shared with the law enforcement community. And this stemmed from laws passed by Congress, but also interpretations of those laws that were enacted primarily during the under the Reno Justice Department, in which there were very strict guidelines that were imposed to ensure that that kind of information sharing did not take place because there were concerns about an abuse of civil liberties. It's much easier to get information for the intelligence community to get information. They can get these secret national security warrants, FISA warrants, that are done, issued by a secret court, lower standard, and the concern was that you get a lot of these warrants, you pick up a lot of information about people inside the United States that doesn't get the normal kind of judicial scrutiny to ensure that there's not abuses going on, and then you share that with, if you shared that with law enforcement people, you could have criminal investigations, people being prosecuted in ways that violated the kind of constitutional rights that the courts have said every citizen is entitled to. So you did have this concept of the wall, but the result, the unfortunate result of that is that there was information within the hands of the U.S. government about terrorists' activity that was not being shared with the law enforcement people who could go out and do something about it and disrupt the activity and arrest the perpetrators. That issue has been addressed. It was addressed in the Patriot Act. There was also a very crucial U.S. Court of Appeals ruling that said that the FBI and Justice Department were misinterpreting the law and putting too high a standard on information sharing. So the combination of that is there is a lot more of that that goes on. It goes on routinely now, and that there is volumes of information that has been gleaned and is being gleaned by the intelligence community that is given instantly to law enforcement agents now.
And what about the terrorist computers?
Well, that was I think what that refers to is the Moussaoui case, where Moussaoui gets picked up, Zacharias Moussaoui gets picked up in Minneapolis in August 16th. The FBI agents there are very suspicious of him. He has all the earmarks of being a terrorist. He was taking these flight school training, didn't seem to be interested terribly much in landing an airplane, just in steering it. It clearly had these radical Islamic views and connections going back. They wanted to crack into his laptop, into his computer, but they felt they needed a FISA warrant, one of these national security intelligence warrants. The FBI wouldn't allow them to get it because they didn't feel that there was sufficient predicate for them to get it, so therefore they could not get into the computer. Now, whether that would have led, it's not at all clear that that would have led them to anything in the 9/11 plot, but it might have generated a great deal of more interest in who Moussaoui was associated with, where he came from, and if put together with other information, possibly, maybe, could have made a difference.
Next call, Paso Robles, California. Good morning. California? We'll move on to Conyers, Georgia. Conyers, Georgia, you're on the air.
Yeah, in Conyers, Georgia, the group of people I hang around with, they're Democrats and Republicans, and we've been discussing that not sharing of information is one of the greatest things that hurt our country. But how much does that compare to the Torricelli bill, where we couldn't put people into these groups that had any kind of shady character, and also the underlying thing? How are we handling the teaching of the Mojave, the teaching of hating America and Islam countries and stuff? Are we making any kind of dent in that? Because until we make a dent in that, and then people come over and join our institutions to learn how to kill us, really, and then go back, there's a lot of things that we need to be working on.
Two things. The reference to the Torricelli bill is another example of where restrictions that were imposed during the 90s to address what seemed to be very legitimate concerns at the time did have unintended consequences that contributed to the intelligence failures of 9/11. In that case, the concern was the CIA having informants using assets overseas who had records of human rights abuses, who were thugs, who were murderers, that we were essentially getting in bed with a lot of unsavory people. And so restrictions were put on who the CIA could use as an asset overseas. The concern seemed legitimate at the time, given some of the abuses that had taken place, especially in Central America, which I think Torricelli has focused on. But one result was to sharply curb the CIA's ability to recruit new assets, because let's face it, when you're dealing with, thugs, thuggish and criminal organizations such as Al-Qaeda, you're not likely to find, pure, pristine people who are going to be able to penetrate it. But one conclusion in the report is that the CIA essentially didn't have any human assets inside the Al-Qaeda, certainly inside Al-Qaeda leadership. And that is a big failing, because some people think the only way you could really get good intel is to penetrate an organization and have spies inside who can tell you what its leaders are talking about and thinking about. We didn't have that.
We have about 5 minutes left with Michael Isikoff. He's going to go up to the Capitol to get the report at 8:30, I believe. New York City, you're on the air. Good morning.
Good morning. How you doing? Okay, listen, I just want to just comment on this, was it Bayoumi, the gentleman Bayoumi
Yes.
in Saudi Arabia? I used to work in Saudi Arabia, and I find that even when I was working there, that getting anything, dealing with the officers and stuff that are there, it is very, very difficult as an American, dealing with their laws and what have you. Now, Bayoumi came to the United States and paid the rent for the apartments for these gentlemen who were in San Diego. Is there any way, do you know, that they could have extradited him back to the United States to face questioning on this matter personally? I know it's very, very difficult because, for instance, it's basically a closed society. So how could the United States government extradite him back so they could question him personally, number one? And number two is, real quick, I disagree with that caller who called and talked about they need to close down the borders to Muslims and what have you. I disagree totally with that, because you need people, you need to understand the way they think, you need to understand their culture, you need to understand what they're thinking, so that way we can have a clearer picture.
On the question of extraditing Bayoumi, the problem is to extradite somebody, you have to criminally charge them. And the FBI has said it doesn't have sufficient evidence to charge Bayoumi with a crime. He was picked up, he left the United States prior to 9/11 in July of 2001, actually went to England, was living in Birmingham, and was picked up by New Scotland Yard after September 11th and questioned quite a bit by New Scotland Yard with the cooperation of the FBI. And the conclusion then, this was relatively early on, October 2001, is that they, although there was a lot of suspicious circumstantial evidence, they couldn't find direct evidence that he had provided material support, knowing material support for the hijackers. There's some people who have looked at what was available to the FBI and the handling of Bayoumi and say that people were being held as material witnesses with a lot less evidence than they had on Bayoumi. One of the problems here is that he was in Britain, he wasn't in the United States, and it was really the Brits' call as to whether or not he was should be let go. He was let go. He is back in Saudi Arabia. At that point, given that there's no criminal charge that he's facing in the United States, it becomes a matter of working with the Saudis to try to get access to him. Prince Bandar said yesterday that he was questioned in Saudi Arabia by their own Interior Ministry officials, and they didn't find any evidence that he was working with the terrorists. Now, if some of the suggestions in the report are correct, and that he had some ties to the Saudi government, that could explain the Saudis' reticence about aggressively pursuing Mr. Bayoumi.
What's been the Saudi cooperation with you as a journalist?
With me as a journalist? They're not known for their great cooperation with journalists. I mean, Prince Bandar is a very press-savvy guy and does pick favorite reporters, usually very prominent ones in the United States, who he likes to talk to, and can be a great source of information for about a lot of political gossip in Washington. The guy's got amazing access to the White House. On the other hand, he is quite an interesting character in his own right, and whether he's being fully candid, especially about his own government and his own role on things, is another question.
Time for one more call with Michael Isikoff of Dulce, New Mexico. Good morning.
Hi, how you doing? I just want to respond to an earlier caller, and I don't want to speak for the earlier caller, but the caller was talking about partisan ideas or partisanship, and I guess my question is, if the goal of the investigation is to find ways to more efficiently handle these types of threats, isn't that type of bigger picture somehow relevant? In other words, if there's too powerful, I mean, you're talking constantly about specifics, and if there's two powerful entities that are constantly countering the opposition, just for the case of countering the opposition, isn't that, in terms of the structure of the whole picture, completely unproductive? In other words, wasn't there a point where Clinton himself wanted to go after Osama bin Laden and a few years ago, and was stopped by Republicans sort of not wanting him to do that and sort of countering him for probably no other reason than the Democrats right now are...
I don't think anybody was stopping him from going after bin Laden. There was a question of whether the political climate in the United States at the time would have led to public support for a huge military effort in Afghanistan and in a foreign country at that time, especially if there wasn't a full public appreciation for what was known by the intelligence community about the threat that bin Laden imposed. On the partisanship question, I mean, my sense from watching a lot of these public hearings is that the intelligence communities, the leadership of the intelligence committees, by Capitol Hill standards, is probably less partisan than many others. I happened to be sitting in briefly during the Judiciary Committee yesterday when they were debating Judge Pryor, because I was waiting for FBI Director Mueller to testify, and the level of partisanship there and on that issue far exceeds anything you see in the oversight of the intelligence committees. But all that said, I think you're going to see some partisan spinning going on after the report is publicly released this afternoon.
What will you be looking for in the report?
Well, I'm going to be looking for a lot of the details that I've written about, how it's handled, the wording. I'm going to be obviously also looking, I'm told this is going to be interesting because the report, you'll be able to see in the report exactly you'll see the context of the deletions. In other words, they left the report, you'll have the page there and then you'll see blacked out portions. So you'll be able to sort of get a handle on the kinds of material that's being deleted, and I think that's going to raise as many questions as some of the stuff that's going to be in the report itself.
Michael Isikoff is with Newsweek magazine, and we appreciate your being here. I understand you've got a chat tomorrow on Newsweek.com.
Yes, at noon on our website, Newsweek.com. I'll be answering questions about the report, so you can log on and fire away then.
Well, you've got 900 pages to read between now and then. Good luck.
I do indeed. Thank you.
Joining us now on the phone is Robert Baer. He's a former CIA field officer. He's also the author of the book See No Evil and a recent Atlantic Monthly cover story on Saudi Arabia. Mr. Baer, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. 28 pages of this is going to be deleted from the public report, and it deals with Saudi Arabia. What's your reaction to that?
I think that's unfortunate because there's a lot of suspicions about the Saudi role. We know that every turn in this plot of 9/11, there's a Saudi involved, not just the intelligence agents in California. And I think the people want to know what is the Saudi connection. By blacking it out, they're going to really start to wonder.
In the Wall Street Journal this morning, it reports that one section that survived, that will be in the report, describes Saudi assistance to some of the 19 hijackers. Among the new information is allegations that funds from Saudi businessmen reached the hijackers through intermediaries.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. The group in Germany, which Atta belonged, had Saudi partners in Hamburg, and there's more than two of them. We don't know who those people are. We don't know who the people are that supported the mosque in San Diego, where the two hijackers arrived in 2000, January. There's a lot more questions than answers when it comes to the Saudi role.
And with regard to the Saudis, what's their support like in the Bush administration?
I think their support's very good. The Bush administration, as the previous administrations, have looked at Saudi Arabia as an ally. It's been classified as an ally. The Central Intelligence Agency never looked at it as an enemy, at least until September 11th. And it's hard for people to get over the fact that there are serious problems in the kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Such as?
Strong support for bin Laden. As one CIA official described it, there are a lot of bin Laden supporters embedded in the Saudi regime. And it's going to be an uphill struggle for the Saudi royal family to root them out.
Well, how has the Saudi royal family treated them thus far?
I think they were as surprised as we were about September 11th, and a lot of them at least, and they had just been complacent about the fundamentalists.
Robert Baer is a former CIA field officer. He's also the author of the book See No Evil. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to continue taking your calls on the 9/11 intelligence report due out by Congress. The House Senate Intelligence Committee held 13 meetings closed to the public and 9 public meetings since they started this in February 2002. They released a public summary in December of 2002, and today at 8:30 a.m., the full 900-page congressional intelligence report on 9/11 will be released to the public and on the web. As soon as we get that web address, we'll make sure to get it to you so that you can find it also. Burnwood, Wisconsin, good morning.
Hello. Thank you for C-SPAN. I had seen a documentary by Alex Jones that was called The Road to Tyranny. It mentioned that 2 months prior to 9/11, President George W. Bush had signed a presidential decision directive, W-199I, and this actually prevented them from arresting any of the al-Qaeda suspects. If the FBI agents or defense intelligence officers did, they themselves could be arrested for national security implications. I just wondered if anyone else heard about this or if any other information had come out about it.
Let's see if any of our callers have heard anything about that. Joining us in a few minutes will be Congressman Sylvester Reyes. He is a Democrat of Texas and a member of the House Intelligence Committee. We'll continue our conversation on this issue with him. Red Bank, New Jersey, you're on the air. Good morning.
Good morning. It amazes me that President Bush was in the White House a year and a half, and how organizations could get so degraded in a year and a half and have not known anything prior to that. And one other thing, I worked in the communications business, and people still ask me why they broke up AT&T. And my pat answer is, it was run so efficiently that it was an embarrassment to the government.
Cleo, Michigan, what are your thoughts on the 9/11 congressional investigation?
Well, I have had questions since the moment it happened. I have a May 14th article of that year from Louis Freeh giving an interview to Elsa Walsh. And he says in this article that he wants to go on record, and he has memos to cover him because of things that happened during his administration. When President Clinton appointed him, his very speech said Louis Freeh was to be in charge of seeking out the terrorists. And if you go back, you'll find that speech. But what's interesting about Louis Freeh, and I find nothing comes up about Louis Freeh, he left office in June before 9/11. And Louis Freeh was working with Prince Bandar, Prince Abdullah, with the ex-President Bush to try to maneuver President Clinton. Now, he did not talk to Clinton for 4 years while Clinton was in the White House. He was dealing with Prince Bandar and Prince Abdullah. Where is Louis Freeh and ex-President Bush? Since President Bush was in that quadrant of people trying to influence policy, they were trying to keep the Saudi investigation from occurring, to do with the Khobar Towers, and they were trying to divert the attention to one of the other countries over there and cause Clinton to go to war then. There is something off.
Here's a little bit from the Wall Street Journal this morning about Louis Freeh, not exactly what you were talking about, but a couple of paragraphs. Not every attempt to block information succeeded. In one episode, two people familiar with the report said, administration officials sought to limit the testimony of 7 or 8 Federal Bureau of Investigation officials critical of Saudi Arabia's cooperation, which law enforcement officials long have described privately as half-hearted and woefully inadequate. There was no similar interference toward testimony by former FBI Director Louis Freeh, whose account of the Saudi role was more positive. And just for clarification, with regard to the report being released at 8:30 a.m. this morning, it is being released to the press at 8:30. However, it is embargoed until 2 p.m. this afternoon, when the 4 principals from the 2002 House and Senate Intelligence Committees hold their press conference. Bob Graham, Nancy Pelosi, Porter Goss, and Pat Roberts. And there is a 9 a.m. background briefing just for the press this morning. But we cannot, if we get it before 9 o'clock, which we think we will, we can show it to you, but we can't read anything from it until 2 p.m. It's embargoed. And at 2 p.m. you can go to cspan.org. It'll be linked to our website at 2 p.m. this afternoon. Lathrop, California, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm just seeing a lot of posturing and finger pointing going on, and it is a well-known thing on Judicial Watch that FBI agents right after 9/11 were blocked from going after Al-Qaeda, and simply put, the Carlyle Group, biggest investors, the Bin Laden family, and the Bush family. I mean, that should say it all to Americans about what's really going on, who are the terrorists involved in our government itself. Thank you.
Coming up at 9 o'clock.